Merci. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. In a year in which I was turned into a reluctant chronicler of genocide, I feel compelled to start by paying my respect to the victims and survivors of all genocides, past and present, including the Native Americans like the Lenape people, who are the original stewards of the land on which this institution stands. As Italian Holocaust survivor Primo Levi reminds us, it is amnesia of the past and the erasure of its victims that allows history to repeat itself. In March, 2 months after the International Court of Justice had recognized the plausible risk of genocide in Gaza, I advised the Human Rights Council that there were reasonable grounds to believe genocide was unfolding. In the following months, the International Court of Justice twice indicated new provisional measures against Israel. The Security Council then ordered a ceasefire, and then the same court declared Israel's presence in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem and Gaza unlawful, and to be brought to an unconditional and total end as rapidly as possible, which this General Assembly requires happen by 17 September 2025. And still, the assault on Gaza continued, even intensifying and expanding beyond Gaza. Allow me to share just some of the gruesome developments before putting this genocide into context. In Gaza, Israel's constant bombing, sniper and artillery fire has continued to spare no one, no journalists, students, scholars, doctors, nurses, persons with disability, people seeking food and safety, or humanitarian workers, including UN staff, including in the so-called humanitarian zones. Conservative figures indicate that the Israeli assault on Gaza has killed, injured, maimed, or buried under the rubble at least 155,000 Palestinians. Entire families have been exterminated, pregnant women and over 700 babies, among 17,000 children massacred. Gaza is now a wasteland of rubble, garbage, and human remains where survivors hold on to life amid widespread deprivation and disease. The Palestinians trapped there have experienced a level of violence not seen anywhere in this century. Prisoners sadistically tortured and raped, mangled and desecrated bodies piled up and left decomposing in the street, the destruction of homes, the violation of intimate life, months of relentless forced displacement across a territory rendered unlivable, with nowhere to flee, and little access to the most basic necessities, having absolutely nothing to return to. And all this by design. The mass graves from which twisted limbs emerged with signs of IV drips still attached or zip-tied have been untold stories of horror. The details lost to oblivion. And still, Israel intensifies its onslaught. And in these last 3 weeks alone, it has orchestrated a ferocious assault on northern Gaza, besieging, depopulating, bombarding, burning alive, abducting and executing thousands of civilians. Disturbingly, similar patterns have extended into the West Bank. Since October 2023, Israeli forces carried out more than 5,500 raids and escorted many of the more than 1,000 violent settlers' attacks, killing 735 Palestinians, which is 10 times the 20-year annual fatality rate, and killing among those 167 children, which is a fifth of all children executed in the past 24 years in the West Bank. Israel has laid repeated siege to towns and refugee camps and leveled, like Gaza, roads, water, sewerage pipelines and energy grids, all while displacing 3,200 Palestinians, depopulating 18 communities and impacting directly 180,000 Palestinians through the largest land grab of the last 30 years. Israel has arrested thousands of Palestinians en masse, academics, students, lawyers, journalists, human rights defenders, doctors, and children. Arbitrarily designated as terrorists, treated as national security threats, they have been subject to systemic abuse, including degradation, torture, and even rape. The devastation inflicted over the past 387 days on the Palestinians as a people, and the pain and loss suffered by each of them, including those forced to watch in exile, as their family and community members get slaughtered, blamed, smeared, will reverberate for generations to come. This is an outrage to humanity and everything the post-World War II international law-based order stands for. These developments cement my assessment that Israel is indeed conducting a genocidal campaign against the Palestinians. The crime of genocide consists of acts accompanied by an intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or a religious group as such. While destruction of the group is interpreted as physical or biological, in physical or biological terms, case law from the Eichmann trial to Rwanda and former Yugoslavia derives intent from acts targeting the very foundation of the group, including the imposition of living conditions leading to slow death and the destruction of the spirit, of the will to live, and of life itself. And when assessing intent, and especially state intent to destroy a group, we must remember that genocide is a process, not a single act, and it includes a plurality of acts and actors. So the key is the singular thread of intent that runs throughout the collective conduct. And in line with the jurisprudence, my report assesses Israel's intent as a state to destroy the Palestinian people holistically through a triple lens approach, considering the totality of the Israeli conduct against the totality of the Palestinian people as such, across the totality of the Palestinian territory that Israel unlawfully occupies since 1967. The totality of the acts include all the crimes, from the genocidal incitement by Israeli leaders to destroy Gaza in its entirety, including to those purportedly aiming to liberate the hostages and eradicate Hamas, to each and every act that has been executed in pursuit of the unfolding destruction. The totality of the land includes the West Bank, is Jerusalem and Gaza, the land that Israel considers its own by divine design. Palestinians' legal and integral right being connected to that land, the totality of the Palestinian as such become marked as an unwanted encumbrance, the enemy, designated for cleansing, elimination, destruction. Who they are poses both an existential and legal threat to Israel. This holistic approach reveals a picture of genocidal intent, where the land is central to understand the intent that drives the state. An inherent conflict exists between Israel, who seeks to acquire more land, and the Palestinians, for whom the land is the basis of their existence. For the Palestinians, the land is not just a place where they live. Like any indigenous people, the land is who they are. And this is what orients the settler colonial state towards the need to eliminate the indigenous. This is the context of the settler colonial framework that has been guiding Israel's conduct in the occupied Palestinian territory since 1967. The continuous displacement, dispossession, subjugation, oppression made of a myriad of violations of every human right of norm applicable in armed conflict. And the brutal events of 7 October provided the impetus to advance toward the goal of a greater Israel, and plans were made, taking advantage of the fog of war. The profound trauma suffered by the Israelis on that day and the rage they experienced is totally understandable. And yet, deepening and building on a deep-rooted hostility toward the Palestinians calls for annihilation grew. In a manner reminiscent of other genocides, the ensuing vengeful atmosphere prepared the soldiers to become willing executioner of the heinous destruction required on them. And the last 12 months confirmed this collective dimension of the crime of genocide. The institutions of the State of Israel, a self-proclaimed rule of law system, the executive, the parliament, the courts, have failed to contain and redress abusive power. Instead, together, they have advanced the course of the current catastrophe. And while international tribunals will hopefully hold individuals accountable, the responsibility of the state must be understood and assessed in its own right and cannot wait. This should have been stopped already by the Security Council last October, after 3 early warnings issued by dozens of UN independent experts, when the ICJ passed its first set of provisional measures, when I presented my first report, or before Rafah was invaded, or before the invasion of Lebanon, and instead the silence, or worse, the justification of a small but very influential number of states in this room, leaves me utterly lost of word. And yet, wherever there are lives to say, there is still the urgency to intervene to prevent new atrocities that will further scar human history. Make that moment be now. And that is it from me, Excellencies.
I thank the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since